The difference between us is that I can feel pain.
Sounds like a real boogeyman. 1-2 Freddy's coming for you.
Not to mention the fact that you're talking to a dead guy.
There's someone else in the hotel with us. There's a crazy woman in one of the rooms.
It's got a death curse.
This isn't science. It's more like black magic.
Your specimen has been processed, and we are now ready to begin the test proper.
Hello, my Night Owl friends, and welcome to a very special edition of Pumpkin Hill Radio, an exclusive interview with Josh Schlossberg, a horror author, editor, and publisher. You have authored Where the Shadows Are Shown, Charwood, and, Malinae. And you're the editor of the Jewish Book of Horror and the lead editor on Terror at 5,280 feet.
That's right.
And that's not all. You're also the creator of Josh's Worst Nightmare. Check that out at joshsworstnightmare.com. That's where you survey the dark landscapes of eco-bio horror fiction. Is that right?
That all seems pretty accurate to me.
Hell yeah. That's just the brief description you gave me. We'll dig into all this and more. Just to start off, we'll kind of work our way into like some of what you're currently working on and everything. But I kind of want to know, just as a blanket question, where is this inspiration coming from when you're writing horror? Like, maybe we could go back to like some of your earliest memories, even just like your childhood. What really scared you as a kid, and like, are you able to fold that into your writing now, or where does that come from?
Yeah, I definitely think most kids are afraid of being alive because we believe in monsters, right? We literally believe in monsters when we're a little kid. And yeah, I remember being in bed and I put the covers over my head. I don't want my foot to be hanging out. That's because I think that there are monsters. I'm not really thinking about murderers or humans. I'm thinking about supernatural creatures harming me. So I think we all have a penchant for dark stories because life is kind of horrifying and we're just teetering at the edge of extinction at any point in time. And for kids, there's no rational world framework or irrational world framework to make ourselves feel better about the fact that this is weird. So yeah, I think it was always there, and I don't know if I was more sensitive as a child or not. I think I was just a normal kid who had an instinct to not want to die, even if I didn't know what that was. But on the other hand, I liked dark things. Like I liked frogs. I was really into frogs, which to me, I don't think I had like the symbolism of it, but they were these weird other creatures in between terrestrial and water. They're not fish, but they're not squirrels. And so I would hang out by ponds a lot and I would try to catch them, and I just let them go afterwards. But my parents said that as I was a little kid, I was always looking down into sewer grates, like almost like in It there,
Yeah.
but no clowns, just for frogs.
That's very interesting. Frogs. I got look at this. I got a small collection of goofy frogs sitting around my area. Yeah. I also
Very cool.
Hell yeah. That's like a nice, like, very pinpointed thing. Frogs, huh? Yeah.
I think that's what is the through line between biological horror and eco horror that I'm writing more and more, almost exclusively eco horror these days. But yeah, it probably all came from frogs.
Yeah, that's that's awesome that you'd like have the identity right there for you. Are you from Denver originally?
No, I'm from the Hudson River Valley of New York State originally.
When did you get to the Denver area?
I moved out here 2014, so I've been here just over 10 years.
For sure, yeah. We got here in about 2017. So yeah, is there any like local Denver-y things that have influenced your stories, or even like in the old days when you're poking around these ponds and stuff? But like, is there any of these like weird legends or cryptids or something around here? You even helped. Yeah, you helped edit this book, the Terror at 5,280. Excuse me. And that was all like horror Denver based stuff, right? Like, was that something that was kind of always on your mind?
For me, it's about the landscape. the folklore and things like that, that's cool. I find that interesting, and I find some cultural things interesting, but I'm really a landscape guy, natural world guy. And I believe that cultures come from the land. So people who live in the desert, sometimes they can be really tough. People who have it easy in like the Pacific Northwest or whatever, they're more chill, right? There's something to that. And you can even trace that to indigenous people, gatherer hunter people. The warring parties are the ones that have less resources because they have to. The ones that the streams are overflowing with salmon, they're like, man, why would we fight? We got plenty. So that's always been the draw for me. And I feel like the culture is almost just a symptom of the land. It's secondary, maybe even tertiary. So so Colorado for me is just about, I mean, we have these stunning landscapes. We have everything from wide open prairie and grassland to getting more into the meadowy, looming into the ponderosa pine, a little more open forest sometimes. And then you get the denser lodgepole pine, and then you have the old growth spruce forest, and then you have kind of the open rock tundra alpine area. So we just have so much to choose from. It's so dynamic. That to me is really the inspiration. It's always been the land for me.
Yeah, we dig into that on the pod too, and whenever we dig into like specific like areas or cryptids or legends, we always try to trace back like what's the earliest people that were here, and like where do those legends actually come from? And often, especially in America, when we dig into that, it's the indigenous cultures, and then we get into all the, I mean, you know, even before the fucking the South, like the like white man came over here, there was like wars and stuff, and there was factions and all this. So it's like there's a constant like battle on the land for, and then obviously fucking, excuse my language, when they came and took the land, like that created such a psychic trauma, right? That it's here forever. Like we talk about like, yeah, just the amount of blood soaked in the land under our feet in like this specific area. It is tremendous. We did an overnight stay at a local haunt, and we were there doing a podcast overnight about it, and there was one spot in the basement that had like an open, it wasn't cemented over, and it was just like the earth, like, and it was like at least a few feet below where the earth is right now, so it was like dug deeper, so it's just like this deeper point on the plains. And like when we were doing like our dowsing there, and like we were doing all of our like experiments right over this little block of land, because it's like it's holding the information somehow. We call it like a psychic tattoo. This point on the earth that has just been like locked in like through multiple planes of existence. It just like whatever metaphysical nonsense and demons are out there, it feels like it's all hidden right there. That's a little tangent though. So that's what we're talking about, like the locale in Denver and all that. How do you feel about the writing community out here? I mean, do you want to talk about the horror collective at all? Or how do you, like,
Sure.
or even maybe this is a better question. Like, are there any like local events or gatherings that you would point horror authors or enthusiasts towards in the area?
Sure. Well, yeah, there's a lot of different things going on. Denver Horror Collective, we go in and out of doing public events. We were doing a lot more public events, ticketed events, things like Music to My Fears, which was original music set to horror fiction. We actually did a second version of that with School of Rock Littleton. And we've done a bunch of different things like that. During the part of the pandemic, we went online. So we did things like improv scary telling, we called it. So we were coming up with horror stories on the spot. We had a bunch of different authors. But as you look around, there are a bunch of different things that are happening. There are a few smaller groups that do things. There are random things that happen at more of these venues that are like horror venues. So there's bars that have themes towards that. There's the Horrid folks, who I believe they changed their name to something else, I forget. So certainly around Halloween, there is a plethora of different things. But in terms of the fiction stuff, it's still not a ton of stuff going on. And that's why Denver Horror Collective created itself, is just kind of the need. But on top of that, the wealth and diversity of horror fiction writers in the whole state of Colorado is quite tremendous. Like we like to say we have the most per capita. I don't know. We've never done a survey, but I'm sure we're in the top 3 per population and horror authors. So there's something going on there.
Yeah, definitely. And I think Horrid, it is still one of the names of them. They opened up something called the Creepatorium too, I think. They're doing all kinds of stuff. We actually worked an event with them not too long ago. I really like what they're doing over there. The horror community in Denver, I think it is. It's sprawling. It has a lot of little niche groups, and it's just you just got to find where you want to fit into it. And I'll try to post some links in the description of this, maybe if people want a little head start on where they can find some of this information. But it is like, feeling getting here almost a decade ago, you kind of have to like find your footing and like, where are we in this thing? And when I moved here and found the Denver Horror Collective, I was like, oh, it's my people finally. And I haven't been extremely active in it, but just having that backbone and like even just being able to see the posts from others and like the community around it, I'm like, oh, it's good to have this foundational spot. And there's a couple different places around here that can get that. But yeah.
Yeah, no, there's tons going on. I think the larger horror community, through all the conferences and conventions there, a lot of that stuff tends to be around maybe horror film and sort of some cosplay, etc. stuff. But, you know, horror writers fit right in there. I think the horror writers are actually not like visibly not the weirdest looking. Like we're not always kind of, you know, visibly dressed as Jason or whatever. Some of us are, but we have the most fucked up imagination. So like one of the times we had one of our critique groups, so we have 3 active critique groups going on, and we were meeting at this kind of metal horror bar. I can't remember what it was at the time. And so, you know, we were surrounded by people who, you know, were really decked out in metal stuff, you know, lots of tattoos, like, you know, really like wearing black and the shirts and piercings and stuff like that, hair, like, you know, they all look pretty cool. Like that fits into the genre. And then those of us sitting around the horror table, like writer's table, you know, we looked a lot more square. You know, a few of us had some tattoos and stuff like that, wearing black, but square. But here we're talking about, well, if you're going to dismember somebody, you really need to start. So we have like the internal darkness and
they're like looking over at you like they're afraid of you over there, kind of. It's like,
yeah, we were the weirdos there.
Are they discussing an actual murder, or is this an idea for a plot right now? We don't know, you know.
Exactly.
It's I feel like half the time I'm putting stuff into Google and I'm like, am I being tagged for this? Like, is the NSA like if you just look up how to dissolve a body, what are the correct chemicals? It's like, I don't know, what lists do you get on for that? Because we're all on that list.
It's a fair point. Yeah, horror author is a good alibi for sure.
Yeah, you're like, it's for a book. It's for a book. Nice. Yeah, and that's a little bit on the horror scene. Back to more just you personally. So we talked about your childhood stuff and where you're kind of grabbing these inspirations from. When you're actually crafting the suspense of the horror, what are some of the techniques that you use for like building the tension or even just creating these outlines so there's something that is specific to you? Yeah, well, I have this theory of writing, and actually I think at some point I'm going to do maybe a webinar on it, and I'm fleshing it out more, but it's like making a monster. So the way I write is like creating a Frankenstein monster. So my first step is the idea. So just an idea comes to me, a vague concept or whatever. To me, that's the soul. That's the soul of the monster. You got to have some sort of animating spirit to it, right? And then the next step is the bones. So it's like laying the foundation of the story. So basically, for me, it's just I don't quite write an official outline like 1A, but I go rough draft that's just very, very bare bones. I accidentally sent one of my critique group members my first draft by accident. He was like, oh man, your first draft is barely, outline. I'm like, shh, don't tell anyone. But yeah, my first drafts are garbage, like intentionally. I'm not trying to make them good. Just get from A to Z. And maybe it's just like A to L to T to Z, but get through the whole thing. So to me, that's the bones of the monster. And then you flesh it out. So that's when maybe I'll get a little more of the character development and make more sense around that. So the flesh of the monsters and maybe the muscle is some of the action. And then the circulatory system, which is the connected. So you connect it all together. Make sure this goes to this, to this. And then finally, it's the skin. It's just the outside polish. And I'll do several polishes because
I'm really into words. I'm a writer, not really a speaker. I limp along with speaking, but I'm really a writer. And so I go back and I'm like, this is how I want it. And I'm just, rubbing it down with increasingly fine sandpaper, and that, to mix all my metaphors here, but then creating a monster at the end of that through that structure. And I don't always do it that specifically anal, like, all right, I have to, but that tends to be my process. And I thought maybe that would be a thing that's helpful for people, or at least people who are starting out writing, that people I find don't finish their stuff because they want their first draft to be their last draft. It's like, don't get caught up in that. Just plow through it. Just move through it. Another writer teacher years ago, it's Laying Track. I can't remember her name. She was a pretty popular whatever. And I remember being sick at my aunt's house. I was hitchhiking across Northern California, and I just got back from the Redwoods, and I think I was smoking pot with too many people, and I got some bad flu or something like that. And I was just lying in bed, and she had this audio book about this writer, and I was like, I don't want to listen to a book about writing, but I had nothing else to do, so I did. And this author did reinforce the process I already had, which it's okay to have bad first drafts. Like I aim for bad first drafts. Like I don't even care. I'm just get the idea out. Okay, now I have something I can build upon this structure. But yeah, the people who are like, well, let me finally craft this sentence. It's like, if you can do that, great. But I would never finish a story if I did it that way.
Have you ever written like with no outline? You know what I mean? Like you ever just like start a story and just, I mean, I'm sure when you were a little younger, maybe. Do you ever do that now? Because that was my first thing with writing was like, okay, I'm just starting. And then it's like all of a sudden I have like a book, and then I look back and obviously like the plots are all over the place, and like there was no like through line or anything. But I mean, it was so fun writing it. But do you ever get into that kind of way, or do you mostly try to just plan it out like this at this point?
Well, I mean, so my first drafts aren't really planned though. So like my first drafts are, I just go hog wild on an idea. And then I have that down, and sometimes I'll pick it apart and it's completely different, but I just get down some version of it. So it's definitely not a very detailed outline. Like I can't do that either. So the first draft I always do, I mean, here's the most recent story I've been working on. I do first draft by longhand. I feel like there is something to that.
He's holding up a handwritten notebook. That's unbelievable. Good handwriting too. Wow.
Well, no, if you look closer, you'll see it's actually not. It's just like it's spiky and it looks neat. I can barely decipher it. But there's something to do with, and there's proof about this, the connection of the hand and the mind. Mm-hmm. And so the first draft, I let that flow creatively, however it's going to go. I don't really think too much. I just puke it out or shit it out, however you want to frame that. But that's the outline in a sense. But sometimes it's not that much of an outline either. It's just a general gist of it. But then I build upon that, and then I type it up, and then I'm getting more structured. And really, I started writing after word processors and stuff like that. So I think the writers who wrote only with typewriters, I actually think they had a different process. Like back in the day.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, you had to be, I feel, just you don't have a backspace. I mean, you have to be like, there's a certain amount of thoroughness that we totally lost. Right? And like just being able to delete a word is like, that's such a powerful move compared to, like if you could give them that power, I wonder what would have come out of it. But you are right.
It's a different process.
How do you,
how
do you balance like, it's horror. It's like sometimes when I'm writing it, I get stuck on like, what's like the grossest thing I can write? And it's like, does that fit the story at all? What am I doing? How do you balance like the gore with the psychological terror, with like the suspense, with just like good characters? You know what I mean? Sometimes I'll write the goriest stuff, and it's like the characters suck right now. Nobody cares about what's happening. How do you go about that? What is your experience with that?
Yeah, so I'm not a huge gore guy. I definitely do not shy away from the darkness stuff there, but I kind of like to build towards the meaning of the viscera that's going to come. So most of the time some of the times I am trying to be shocking and extreme, but most of the time I just have this idea in advance, and sometimes if I go too far into the horror, it can actually take away from the more subtle concepts I'm going. So it's really story by story. So one story I have that's in my current collection where the shadows are shown. So the way it came about was I went to a writer's workshop, and our assignment in person live was to write something to gross people out. I think that was literally the assignment. So what I did, I'm like, okay, I wrote a little short thing. We had 10 minutes or something like that. Thing about, I think we can swear on this. Well, it's not a swear.
Oh yeah, we can swear.
An asshole like in the center of a hand. Nothing more complex than that. Just the idea, the juxtaposition of our hands are out there all the time, completely public, accessible. An asshole is not, hopefully, right? So I combined the two. I'm sure others have done it, but I wrote that up and I got really into it, and the group seemed to really like it. Like, oh, you did. I'm like, all right, I should expand upon this. But I was like, all right, there's only so far I can go with an asshole in a hand. Like, where is this story going? What meaning is there behind this? Not that a story always has to have meaning, but like I could do something more. I was like, well, what if it's a vagina? And I'm like, all right, now I'm starting to get into some symbolism here, right? Yeah. So I ended up writing a story, The Hand You're Dealt, which was originally called Handgina, because I wasn't being subtle at all. No one would publish it. No one would take this story. What are you doing here? Yeah. No one wanted it. But so basically it ended up being, what if it's a vagina? What if it's a guy? What if he's maybe a little bit chauvinistic? And then he starts to have an experience that maybe starts to get him to see what it's like to not be who he is. And he starts developing kind of an appreciation, obviously there's a lot more to being a woman than having a vagina, but like symbolically speaking, that is what got him to see another side. So I started out with an idea that was kind of like a shock factor there. And then there still is, because, he's dealing with it. It's changing. He doesn't know what to, so there is some.
That's very like Twilight Zone-y, right? That sounds like a Twilight Zone like story for sure. That's nice. Yeah.
But it actually, let me just say that the reason I started up looking for another writers group that ended up becoming Denver Horror Collective, that several of us started up, was I had that story in my other writers group, and people were saying I couldn't get through it. It was so gross. I'm like, all right, this is not the right group for me. It's like, how squeamish. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. That's funny. You're like, it's good. I can't read anymore. It's too gross. How do you like gauge whether a story is actually like scary enough, or just gross out? Is there a process for testing that and like refining that fear factor?
So I'm going to admit that I'm not the scariest horror writer out there. There are folks I know who are far more frightening. I think to a certain degree what I'm doing in my horror is I'm trying to take the scary and make it more accessible and acceptable. So I'm almost like trying to take the shadows and make them more comforting. So I'm kind of like, in a sense, the opposite of a horror writer in some ways. I'm like an anti-horror writer, because I'm like, it's okay that this is happening. Learn to accept this. So I'm taking it from the scared into sometimes being less scared. Sometimes, some of the times it goes in the other direction. But I honestly think the things that scare me the most, I'm not quite ready to write about. When I think about the things that scare me the most, it's just kind of being in a dark place and there's a figure there and you're not sure. Like, I remember I was camping somewhere in the winter. It was around Thanksgiving, and it was a closed campground. You weren't even supposed to be there, but whatever. And I was definitely out there by myself and had to walk a little ways. And just walking back to my car to get something in the night, there was this one abandoned sort of shack that was on this other side. And I thought I saw a little light in there. And frankly, that was like one of the most frightening things I've ever seen. Yeah. But either I'm not ready to write about that. Like, while I'm in the midst of fear out there, I'm not like, cool, let me write this down for later. I'm like, I'm scared right now and I don't want to think about this. But it's that kind of stuff that just does freak me out. Somebody who's not supposed to be there and you can't see who they are and you're not sure whether to confront them. And, a dark house at night and you hear a sound, you don't know if there's a figure there. That to me is the most frightening, but oddly, I haven't written that much on that. So yeah, it might be some psychological psychological block. But ultimately, the way I find out if it does the story upset me, disturb me to a certain degree? And then really it's like stand-up comedy. Sometimes you have to try it out in front of people to see whether it's funny or in this case scary. So I take it to my critique groups and they say, okay, you can maybe punch this up here, or this is kind of prosaic. But yeah, some of my stuff, a lot of it tends to be understated, and I'm still experimenting with my form. So who knows where it's gonna go next.
For sure. Do you like to like self-insert? Like, are your protagonists often like Josh, basically, or is it how do you go about creating like a memorable character within that? Because that's the other thing with like some horror that you read. It is like, again, it's all about this like fear factor, like the factor of the gore. It's like then you look at the character and you're like, oh, I never even cared about them. Like, how do you create like a memorable somebody that I would care about? Is there
right?
a
Yeah.
secret?
Well, I mean, the way I do it, and it's up to the readers to decide whether I do it well. But yeah, I'm very character driven in my work, and I would say the characters have anywhere from 0% to 75% of me in it. Sometimes it's just little superficial details, like, okay, this thing happened to me in high school, and that will just make it a more believable thing to move along. Some of it, a lot of what I've done in Where the Shadows Are Shown, it's characters who get irritated by things. Things irritate me. And also they want to make them right. So maybe they're coming at it from a justice perspective, but then they go too far and they're no longer really doing justice. Maybe they're doing vengeance, or maybe they're just being petty narcissists. So I play with that. And so some of those are actually pokes at myself. There'll be some things that, like, I'll just say in one of these stories, it's about a guy with happy campers, and he is out there camping, kind of in this campground in the middle of nowhere, but there's some good old boys there listening to this radio station that are just loud, polluting his experience. And that happened to me. I didn't do anything about it because I'm an adult at this point. 10 years ago, I might have done something about it. But the character in my story decides to confront it, and it goes off the rails from there. And I actually wrote the rough draft of that while that was all happening. I was sitting at this picnic bench in the dark writing about the story. And frankly, the things I would have liked to have done to these fellows, but I did not.
Well, that's like what we were talking about, like all these Google searches as a horror writer. It's like you're almost just writing your like traumas and you're like the events that you're like, what could I have done to this guy? What the hell? That's funny.
Some of it's that. Some of it's literally the opposite of me. I just sometimes will like, well, what is an instinct I have? What is the opposite of that? So then I can come up with characters like, but yeah, it's probably pretty hard to write a character who doesn't have some element of you, because we've only been inside one head our whole lives, hopefully. And so that's the take. But yeah, I look at other people that I know, and I'll build sometimes cores out of them. It's almost never really them, but it's some maybe superficial aspect or one aspect of their personality. So those characters aren't me at all. But yeah, so you'll never know. You'll never guess in the stories which ones are true to me and which ones are the opposite. You'll never know.
Let's talk about publishing for a little bit, and maybe like your newest venture, which is again, let me make sure I'm getting it right. That's the one called Where the Shadows Are Shown, correct?
So that's my newest personal work. But Denver Horror Collective has a new anthology that's coming out soon too.
So on the publishing end, you like self-publish your own stuff then? What's your process for all that, if you don't mind sharing?
Well, so my first two books were published by other publishers, so small publishers. So D&T Publishing published my novella Malinae, which is cosmic horror basically, and then A Gotta Try It, which is an imprint of Madness Heart Press, published Charwood. And then, I've had a bunch of short stories that have been published elsewhere, but I decided to do the self-publishing venture for this short story collection because I've put out 4 books thus far through Denver Horror Collective of other people's writing. And I realized, hey, I can have complete control over it. I know how to get the book out there, and then I don't have to worry about being canceled either. So all of those pieces played into this experiment for doing the self-publishing thing for Where the Shadows Are Shown. I also know behind the scenes that a lot of the authors I know who actually make the most money and sell the most copies are doing their own stuff. So
Yeah, well,
more and more,
yes, but between the pandemic, I feel like we lost some of the bigger publishers, and people really were able to like find out how to get into that self-publishing game almost. I know what you're talking about. There are some people out there using like Kickstarter and stuff that are blowing sales out of the water, self-publishing stuff. It's really cool to see that it's like possible, you know, because even 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when I'm looking at like trying to get anything published, and it's like what am I going into, like, I don't, there's like the big five, you know, and it's like, or you're reaching out to like 100 different agents and everything, and that's like, I mean, talk about horror. That's like every single week you're getting like a rejection, or just like, this one's not for me. You know what I mean? How do you deal with, not even on the publishing side, but just like when people like don't gel with your stories? Is there like any feedback, or do you just like let it go? I mean, do you try to take into account if somebody actually has like a thing they don't like, or is that just more of a personal thing for them?
yeah, I mean, I don't write for others per se. I write what I write, and I do try to find, okay, which of my ideas that I'm into might also overlap with something people could conceivably be into.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I'm not pure narcissism. Like, I'm writing this, everyone hates it, you know, and I'm just like, I got an idea like this. I'm like, okay, maybe that one's a little too far out for anyone to deal with. Oh, I got this other idea. Oh, yeah, well, okay, let me try that one, you know. So like for my short stories, a lot of them are just really out there, and you read a lot of publications and you kind of know what they're looking for. So I'm not somebody who will read one of those and like, I'll write a story for them, just because, I don't know. I feel like the chance of getting published by them anyway is slim, that I don't do things that way. But what I do is, if I write a story and then I'm done, I'm like, oh, that would fit pretty well with, you know, No Sleep Podcast. So I have been submitting to No Sleep Podcast for many, many years. They rejected all my stories, even the ones I thought were my better stories. And then I'm like, yeah, because my stuff is weird. My stuff doesn't really fit a lot of the conventions. It's kind of experimental and out there and strange. And then I wrote a story that was basically, well, I'm not even going to say what kind of story it is because I would ruin the story, but I wrote it, and as soon as I was done with it, I'm like, where will I send this? I'm like, oh, No Sleep Podcast, and they'll publish it. And they did. Like, it fit. So knowing where to put your stuff, but I don't recommend people, I mean, you can be successful this way, but personally for the creative process, the idea of me trying to write the thing that I know that they want, that just doesn't work for me. I have to be driven by my own.
Yeah, definitely finding a niche that actually like holds your stuff at a level of I agree. You can't try to fit into a box if you're not going to fit in that box, unless you're a cat, I guess.
I mean, you can. People do it all the time. People are like, okay, this is what this publication you know, because editors get like, a lot of editors have a very particular taste, and they want more of the same of that. And if you want to, you know, that can be a good experiment to try to write. I'm not trying to discourage people. I just know for my sake, it's just not worth it. I've never been drawn to like, all right, how can I do a thing that would please this individual? But once I put it out there, I'll try to shop it around to the right places. But yeah, that process is dispiriting. The parts I hate most about fiction writing are the shopping it around and the marketing. Everything else I really like. I like the writing. I like editing. I actually like editing. I never really wanted to be an editor, but I like that. But then the other crap, I'm like, all right, I got to make all these graphics and then post it here. I'm like, oh, I do that, but I don't like that. Yeah,
that's the real horror of it all, isn't it? It's like trying to get anybody to see this thing that you made. That's a whole fucking task. Oh yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing a little bit of like just your publishing history and all that. And we'll make sure to post all the links to all the stuff that you have in the description too, and we can shout out your stuff at the end of this. Just a little more though. Like, have you seen any new? What are some like emerging things in the horror genre like lately that you're seeing? Is there any? I don't know, maybe new ideas isn't the right word, but it's just any like emerging content that's different, that's just like seems grabby to you, that you'd point people towards?
Well, I would say that so the mainstreaming of folk horror is a good thing. Like, I think the idea that this concept, frankly, the concept of folk horror was only really coined, I don't know, in the last decade. And so I'm really drawn to anything remotely folk horror, which could be, there's definitions for it. I think there's some academic came up with something called the folk horror chain, which is, you take this or leave this, it doesn't matter, but it's something that takes place usually close to nature. There's a remote location. There is some sort of outsider that comes into some closely knit group that has some archaic, or let's just say odd behaviors. And then there's some culminating ceremony, event, whatever. It's sort of the same story over and over, but the different takes of that, if they're done artfully, they can literally tell the same story. And it's like, cool. So I'm drawn to pretty much anything folk horror. And there's something called Folk Horror Revival that's putting out a lot of stuff around that. So if it's folk horror, I'm in, whether it's a movie, a podcast, storytelling. So I really gravitate towards that. And I would say something that's in even the more popular realm that somehow is falling under the radar of a lot of the horror world, but is doing very well actually commercially, is the Quarry Brothers. And they put out something called Old Country, and then something now called Wilderness Reform. And Old Country is definitely more straight up nature-based folk horror. And their stuff, I mean, one of the guys I actually asked at one of these local events, because one of them is they're both from Boulder. One of them's still here. The other one is out of state. And I'm like, how do you get your stuff in with the industry? And basically he said, well, you have to know people. He admitted that. But he's a screenwriter, but he's been turning his stuff, like they're writing the novels and the screenwriting scripts at the same time and then selling them. So I'm pleased to both see a book that is both really riveting to me and is commercially successful, because typically that doesn't match up for me. I'll like a lot of commercially successful stuff, but it's never my favorite stuff. And my favorite stuff is always really obscure. Like my favorite horror author, you probably haven't even heard of, his name is Richard Gavin. No one knows about him, nobody cares. I think he's the best out there. But the Quarry Brothers are doing some of this folk horror stuff. The Midsommar, which is just a movie and stuff like that. I think that getting people into that is great, because what folk horror is, it's a modern day reinterpretation of our connection with nature and how we've stepped away, because usually it's like people going back to these weird communities and they're doing all these weird things, and they're seen as the backwards ones because they do sacrifices. But you can look at it another way. It's like, well, they're actually in tune with the land, and we're the weirdos who are living in the city, whatever. So anything folk horror, I think we're in the folk horror renaissance right now. Maybe it's starting to decline. I haven't seen the decline yet.
Hell yeah. Isn't it cool when your tastes actually match up with what's coming out, and to try to obviously you still find your little niche things, but having a main, Midsommar, I've most people I've talked to have seen that movie, and it's
right.
Even 10, 15 years ago, what does that movie look like? It's probably completely different just based off of cultural taste and all that.
Right.
Hell yeah. Yeah. One more time on that author that no one's heard of, Richard something. What was it?
Richard Gavin is his
Gavin.
name.
Nice.
Yeah, he's hard to explain, and I'm still promoting him, even though he was going to blurb my earlier novel, and then without he hadn't even looked at it yet, and then he decided he just didn't have time for that. So even despite that, he is still my favorite author, and I don't hold that against him. He also writes some nonfiction around occultism. He's like the real deal. He, I think, believes in occult stuff. Lovecraft didn't believe in that stuff, right? He wasn't really much of a spiritualist per se. Maybe there was some element, but not much. He was pretty hard-boiled rationalist, and also had obviously some backwards views. But Richard Gavin, I think, is the real deal. I think his fiction, in his mind, is actually nonfiction.
Yeah, so. Definitely. That's my whole life too, is everything is real. Cool. Yeah, I love talking about occult stuff. That's mostly what we do on Pumpkin Hill Radio. We talk about paranormal, high strangeness, these like metaphysical concepts.
You might want to get him on a podcast. I've seen him on podcasts. I'm trying to find his books right now.
Yeah,
but
Richard, if you're listening, come on. And then also give that blurb to Josh. He's earned it. All right.
Maybe next time he will. But no, this is one of my favorite books. This is from Richard Gavin, Sylvan Dread. And it's basically all stories that take place in tales of pastoral darkness. So they're all basically nature-based folk horror stuff. And it's definitely influenced me in my next book is going to be all nature-based eco horror. And I'm definitely borrowing some inspiration from him.
Yeah, hell yeah.
For that.
Let's I don't want to keep you here all day, but I still got tons of questions. So let me just ask you a few more wooey woo stuff we could put into our pocket a little more. Just like these questions are kind of going from like least to most insane, I guess. So just stop me when it's like totally out of pocket. But have you just on the head of it, like, have you experienced something that you couldn't explain rationally, like paranormal type stuff?
So yeah, people will be disappointed. Not really, but I feel like all of my existence cannot be explained. Like I'm constantly freaking out about just the weirdness of the mundane and the prosaic. So to me, I don't need. So a friend of mine, he's like, "Oh, look at all the alien stuff." I'm like, "Yeah, maybe they're real," but I'm like, I'm still trying to understand what a prion is, which is basically like what mad cow disease is these particles that aren't even quite alive and they're not even viruses. I'm like, I don't really need aliens. I'm still puzzling and disturbed by this material that supposedly even sterilizing it at 1300 degrees doesn't kill it. Like, that shit freaks me out.
Yeah, like at what point is that just a demon, right? Like,
it's basically a demon. Yeah.
Right though. It is like there's so much stuff right here. We're already trying to get out of the earth, and it's like I don't even know what the hell's around that corner,
We don't know. I mean, just our psychology, So like that's why I wrote a lot of biological horrors, because I've been really interested in just the way biology works. But I mean, our psyche is pretty dark. How we potentially have any potential impulse in us, and you see people who are peaceful people and they just snap. Is that it? So to me, that's like way more frightening than a ghost to me, or something, some sort of entity. Although I definitely do believe that there is some sort of energies that can linger in situations, and what those are those ghosts. The closest I had to a ghost experience, I guess, was the first night I stayed in this place I rented for several years in rural Vermont. It was a 1849 converted schoolhouse, and it still looked like that. And it had even some of the little kid desks in it. And I always had a good vibe in there. But the first night I woke up and I did hear a voice that had said something. Like I just woke up on the tail end of the voice. And I didn't know what to make of it. I never heard it again. At most, I was thinking maybe it was a test to see how I reacted to it, and I was cool with it. And the house was owned by, she's sort of this hippie pagan choreography instructor who would do these community rituals. And she had died not that long before, and I was renting the house from the daughter because they hadn't got rid of really most of her stuff. So I was like living in this older lady's stuff, and she had a portrait of her above where my work desk was. And it was this woman basically dressed as kind of a ghoul in chains from some dance thing.
Yeah.
So maybe there was some connection there, but I think she liked me. I think she was cool with me being at her house. So it wasn't really negative, but yeah, that's the closest I could say that a direct experience with something like that.
Yeah, I mean that's people. Yeah, people often think like that ghost, that residual energy, whatever you want to call it, is like generally like a negative thing. And it's like, I
Right.
think it's totally like 50-50 at least. I interviewed the writer and director of Friday the 13th Part 6 a couple months ago, and we got into
Cool.
the same stuff. You know, I like to talk movies with him, but I'm like, what about weird stuff though? And he was like
Yeah.
totally going with it, and he was explaining how he has a mausoleum that he bought in Hollywood Hills, and every year he has a party in it so that he can generate positive energy in there, so that after he passes, when you go and visit, you'll still like feel like the positive presence right there, you know? So like and I like love that, like that idea. He's like, I'm throwing a party in there. They never talk about death or anything when they're in it, but it's just like he wants people to be able to like hear his harmonica like when he's not even in there and stuff anymore. I just loved that. Like as far as like a positive version of all that, you hear so many. We did a whole thing a couple episodes ago on this like black mausoleum in Scotland that's like totally freaky, and I was like, the opposite of that though is like this guy's thing. So it is. I think that the energy is. I definitely think it's there, whatever you want to call it, and I think that it can be a lot of different things. It doesn't just have to be negative. It can be, a positive ghost experience, I guess.
Sure.
What about just a few more questions? Like, okay, so we covered some of that stuff. What about like the concepts of parallel universes or alternate dimensions or like stacked planes? We talk a lot about like, planes on top of each other. That's kind of when I say psychic tattoo, like imprinting through like multiple realms of existence, basically, like a needle like sticking through like a whole notebook of paper, and like each one is kind of like that. Any thoughts on that sort of stuff?
Yeah, dimensions. So, I mean, I know a lot of people who claim to have the world figured out, and I sure as hell am not one of them. So most of my stuff is like, I don't know, but I'm definitely not somebody who says no way to pretty much anything. I leave like at least 1% or maybe 0.1% of like, sure. But the dimensional stuff, and I'm not really, my head isn't great around physics. I'm more of like biology stuff, but there seems to be plausible explanations for dimensional stuff, and whether you get into black hole stuff and then time, traveling things, there seems to be potential explanations for that. So are there layers of existence? I think very possibly. I also think, however, that the human brain has not evolved to process that. So I don't know if we're going to figure it out, is what it comes down to. It may be so, maybe we get inklings of it, but this tool, even though it's the most complex in the universe that we know of, I think there's so much that's more complex. And I think that might be one of the puzzles. But sometimes I think about dimensions, and I've wanted to write a story about this. I just haven't figured out a way that each season is a dimension. So I can look out the window at the aspen behind me, and not that long ago it was green leafy aspen. Now it's sparse and yellow. Soon it's going to be bare and naked. There'll be piles of snow. So it's the same scene, but it's almost like each season is this different dimension. There's a layer stripped away or added to that. Mm-hmm. So that's been my thoughts on interdimensions as of late.
Sure. Yeah, we dig into these weird things. We'll talk about like Kugelblitz black holes, which are like ball lightning and stuff. And it's weird that they have a name for that in like a different culture. That like all these things. It's like when you look at like a 5D shape and you just can't imagine it anymore. It's these kind of it's that kind of stuff. You're right. Like the brain, it's the most powerful thing that we know of. Yet we can't grasp some of these concepts that seem to be there. You look at stuff on the quantum level and you're like, none of this makes sense anymore. So never mind, throw the whole thing out. But
I'm not a skeptic. I mean, I don't know. I just don't know.
Mm-hmm. What about like, you ever heard of like tulpas or like thought form manifestation, that kind of stuff?
No, explain what that is.
So like a tulpa, I believe it's an old like Hindu word meaning. We kind of like bastardized it. It basically at this point means like a thought form. So it's almost the idea of like, okay, if enough people believe in like even like Santa, then I guess Santa's real. It's that kind of thing. It's like a group. It's that like hive-mindedness almost, and like almost just like manifesting something into reality. Almost. There are some reports of people being able to like you fully dream up this thing in your mind, and now it's out in the world. I believe there's even like an X-Files episode about it where it's like somebody summons up this like garbage man, and he goes through the trash. I don't know. Do you think anything like that would be possible? Like, I mean, literally, like your writings, like your thought forms, creating an entity or like energy movement in that way, like all from like thought to manifestation. Is there anything there?
Well, first of all, if there is such a thing, I hope that doesn't happen with the things that I write, because I don't think that would be very pleasant for the world. I think it's entirely possible the idea of a physical manifestation is what we're talking about, be created versus, out of thought. I think we don't know enough about matter and energy to say that that's impossible. I haven't personally witnessed it. Would I need to physically witness it for me to check it off as true? Probably, but I think that is also very likely. I mean, keep in mind that, even over the last few hundred years, the shit we used to believe in, that we thought we understood, and what we actually now understand is such a world apart that the idea that, we figured everything out in 2024 is badness. Of course we have it. So I think that's entirely possible. But what I do know for a fact is that, in terms of groupthink, I mean, that's what witch hunts are and things like that. So I do think people can, through an ideology per se, or a really fixed fundamentalist black and white thinking, we can sure as hell create illusions of things that will make people do horrible things. So we can turn somebody into a monster in our mind in a way that is not true. So in a sense, this is sort of the opposite of what you're getting at, but I do think that people can believe anything. And the question is, when is that real and when is it not real? I don't know, right? I mean, the whole concept of consciousness is that there's no green, like that green, it's that tree, that spruce tree out there is the opposite of green. It's every color but green is the one that's bouncing off. And so we're perceiving stuff. So who the hell knows? So I'm going to say, that is entirely possible. It's as possible as anything else to create physical forms out of thought. I just personally haven't witnessed it, but
that is fine. I mean, I think I said a couple episodes ago. You're right. Like to think we have anything figured out in 2024, and it's like, we were positive as like the human species that like witches and werewolves and vampires were real like 40 years ago. Yeah. Now we're all supposed to be like, oh, never mind. And it's like we had these ideas for 10,000 years, and now we're like, no. And like, I think if nothing else, then again, it's like it creates like a psychic imprint. Like there's such a psychological trauma to that, like to just shoving off as a species this idea of like magical intention and all this. Like it seems so insane to me to be like, no, this isn't real anymore. And just because we have like obviously science all the way, but like I think there's ways to like fit these in that, with just anything that's like any technology that's advanced enough just looks like magic anyway. So I think it's one of those like, 40 years ago we knew it all, and now it's like it's all flipped. And I think it's somewhere in the middle. It's hard to you can't drop. I think that like almost all religions have at least a drop of truth in them. All that kind of stuff. Any folklore, any old legends, like there's something there to it, and so. Holding on to that as like a writer, like a storyteller, like I think it is important to hold those, hold like a few different truths in your mind at once,
Yeah, we had figured things out back in the day, and sometimes we were wrong, but sometimes we were right, and we got rid of the things that were right. There's this concept of the archaic revival, Terence McKenna, like we're going back to learn some of the wisdom of the past, at the same time maybe not taking things like bloodletting and leeches too seriously. At the same time, there is even a little science behind. They thought that it's actually people who have like excess iron in their blood actually did benefit from bloodletting. So
like the humors you hear about, like letting
right, the humor.
It's like that's such a I love all that kind of hell yeah. Maybe one more question here. I guess we dig a lot into like sleep paralysis stuff and like shadow people and kind of like dreamscape manifestation, and I hear stories of couples will be sleeping together and one person will be fully asleep, like experiencing the sleep paralysis, and then the person next to them is awake and they're like hearing stuff in the next room that like is going with like they're like seeing stuff like come out of this other person's like dreamscape almost. Anything like that for you? Do you ever experience sleep paralysis on a personal note?
Thank God I don't, because that's the scary time of night, and there is science behind our minds are not thinking and judging right when we're just emerging out of sleep. So like that's why we'll maybe ruminate and worry about things that we think are a big deal. And then we wake up, we're like, why did I make such a big deal of it? It's literally a brain state at the time where we're very vulnerable and susceptible. No, but that's our most vulnerable time. We knock ourselves out and anything can come and kill us. And then who knows what's going on in our heads. So that stuff actually really freaks me out. And I'm glad I've never had that. I have seen the closest to that. So my sister, when we were really young, I don't know, maybe she was 10 at the time. And so I would have been like 13 or 14. She would get what we would call the screaming mimes. Mm-hmm. And she would, I guess, it's not sleep paralysis, but it was sleepwalking, but like night terrors, I guess is another. And I remember her still like, so this is all this stuff that, why haven't I incorporated this into my writing? I think because it actually scares me too much. Yeah. But she would run from her bedroom down the hallway into the bathroom. And I remember her going up like against if I could demonstrate this. So this is the bathroom mirror, and like her hands on the counter and just like screaming it into her own face in the mirror. Like that is horrifying.
Terrifying. Yeah. Gosh, that is just from a horror movie. You know what I mean? People like took that and made that into a horror movie. Damn. Thank you for sharing that. And I think everybody's got a little something, you know. You said you didn't, and then you immediately said, well, I did see this one person, you know. And it's like every single person I talk to is like, no, but then yes. And so I think there's something else over this reality, either hanging in the air or just some ancient past. Well, okay, let's start closing out here. I've had you for an hour. I know we got stuff to do today. First off, I'd like to invite you back at any point. I got a whole bunch more stuff to talk about. We can get you in. I can just have you on like a normal episode, so I can just shout at you about like metaphysical nonsense for a full hour and a half, you know?
Sure. Sounds great.
And then, I'd also like to just put out a nice formal invitation to the rest of the Denver Horror Collective. I'd love to interview anybody else there and any other up-and-coming authors just to get that spot going. Josh Schlossberg, do you want to promote some of the stuff that you have in the works here? And I'll make sure to put the links into that in the description.
Yeah, I mean, the best way to be introduced to any of my work, if you should so desire, where the shadows are shown. One of the reviewers said there's literally something here for everyone. So there's a whole bunch of subgenre. And I do have this money back guarantee for my book, which is if you don't find one story that really resonates with you and one story you strongly dislike, like that you're just like, no, wrong, incorrect, I'll give you your money back. So that I hold true to that. And that's all I want. If the rest of the 17 do nothing for you, that wasn't my promise. Just one you're going to be really into, one you're really not going to like.
Yeah, you hear that, everybody? Put that to the test. I want everybody to find a story they like in that, and let me know about that. Anything else for today, Josh?
And you can go to my website, joshsworstnightmare.com. I have a newsletter. I put out posts. I was doing a podcast, not doing that so much. I do it once in a while, but I write little pieces here and there, and you can just keep track of what I'm doing. But I'll have a eco horror collection I plan to put out sometime in 2025. So stay tuned if you're into, just horror writing, literary horror, eco horror, folk horror, biological horror. That's kind of my jam there.
Eco horror. I got to get more into that. It sounds like you have something for me there. That sounds perfect. I want to also point people to just the Denver Horror Collective. It's just a nice group to be a part of. And there's that, like you said, there's a lot of events. If anybody's looking to get a startup on their writing and not feel like they're alone, some people, it's like you can't always afford to go to school, or it's just not the path for you. And it's like, this is a way to like meet people, make those connections, and work on your writing. So definitely check out the Denver Horror Collective as well. Just on my end of things, everybody listening, go ahead and rate us 5 stars. Send in any paranormal stories or anything you got to pumpkinhillradio@gmail.com. Same for you, Josh. If you got anything else you want to hit up, always we can have little conversations about it too. We also have a Patreon, patreon.com/pumpkinhillradio. We got a monthly bonus episode and all kinds of stuff. Digital version of my book, physical version at a certain level. And what else do we got? just check the link tree in the description for all the socials. We're really active on Threads right now, so we get a lot of listener replies and emails through there as well, so maybe hit us up on there. We also have an Etsy, pumpkinhillradio.etsy.com, for pins, prints, all this kind of stuff. I'm like an extreme artist out here, so I'm just making everything I can. I'm extreme, I'm not good. That's the difference. I'm like, I do as much as I can, but it's not like it's jack of all trades, but master of none on my end of things. You can use code SECRET for 25% off orders of $25 or more on the Etsy. Also, check out our partner Dubby. That is a powdered energy drink, with green coffee extract. It's really good. I drank some this morning. I don't even drink coffee anymore. I just drink that. Use code StarMother for 10% off there at dubby.gg. Also, support the rats. Support apopo.org. This is the nonprofit organization that trains giant African pouch rats to find and disarm landmines in Tanzania. Okay, so this is basically landmines from ancient wars that are dropped on third world countries that are there from like 100 years ago, and they teach these rats to sniff them out, and they're light enough to be over them and not detonate them. It's a really cool cause, and we have adopted Ronan the hero rat, so we donate every month to him. You can check the description to send a donation that way, or check the Instagram to donate as well, just to do a little bit of good at least. It's the goofiest cause we could find, so we're sticking to it. Sorry, Josh, that was just a bunch of my plugs at the end, too. I didn't mean to just keep you on here, but that's what we got. Again, check out Josh. Check out all of his works. It'll be in the description below, so make sure to check that out. Josh, it's been a pleasure having you. This went really, really well. I can't wait to have you back sometime. I do want to bring you on some normal episodes. We can just talk about some insane stuff. We'll just get into the weird. Until next time, Josh, any last words?
No, just keep spreading the shadow. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, hell yeah. This has been a pleasure. Thanks. This has been Pumpkin Hill Radio. I am Travis Wyrmwood. This is Josh Schlossberg over there, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.